Expendable, poorly trained, or otherwise ill-equipped mass-produced armies are a common theme in many universes. And today we are going to look at 3 different sci-fi factions with the Astra Militarum of Warhammer 40k, the Grand Army of the Republic in Star Wars, and the Helldivers of Super-Earth. But for this comparison, we are not looking at these armies for their max faction strength, so that means we're excluding things like Jedi and Space Marines, and we're more so comparing the effectiveness and training of their grunts. When you take a look at these 3 factions, you instantly realize that life under these governments is various levels of horrendous, but we are going to start this off with what is probably the most awful to live under, with the Imperial Guard. Otherwise known as the Astra Militarum, Imperial Guardsmen are the first line of defense for the Imperium of Man against Xenos and heretics alike in the 40k galaxy. Comprised of billions of men and women pulled from planets within Imperium-controlled space, the Astra Militarum has a vast array of light and heavy vehicle support, regularly employing artillery to pummel their opponents before engaging them with superior numbers. Guardsmen are usually accompanied by a commissar to maintain morale and execute unruly members, while also being supported by heavily armored vehicles such as Chimera and Leman Russ battle tanks. Guardsmen do actually receive a decent amount of training, but the real goal with them is quantity over quality, and they are renowned for dying in a rather pathetic manner on their first deployments. The casualty rate for Guardsmen is actually so bad, it is often joked about that they do not survive their first 14 hours. That being said, they still follow a strict chain of command and are surprisingly organized at times given the logistical failings the Imperium suffers from. They are most regularly equipped with a standard issue lasgun, a laser-based weapon that is easily supplied though lacks the firepower of other weapons in the Imperium such as the bolter. The greatest benefit of a lasgun is its ease of use and ability to remain functional through some of the most desolate environments. Most guardsmen are also equipped with standard issue flak armor that is mostly resistant to small arms fire and shrapnel, though some units are still given carapace armor to survive far more devastating energy weapons and higher caliber impacts. Though these units are exceptionally rare and pretty much only the highest tier the Astra Militarum is willing to deploy. Despite being potentially under-armored, Guard really aren't left out to dry as much as people think, and they do have plenty of other specialized units with things like jump packs and heavier weaponry. These are usually deployed as the situation demands, and they are even oftentimes accompanied by things like sanctioned psychers and the massive abhuman ogrons. They are also usually supported by the Imperial Navy, though it should be said that the Guardsmen commanders themselves, just like real-life militaries, have very little control of actual naval assets. Guardsmen are shockingly effective considering their low requirement of entry and massive pool of recruits. Without them, the Imperium wouldn't function. It really goes to show that if you gather up enough people and endlessly send them at a target while bombarding it with non-stop artillery, you can get a lot of W's. More notable regiments such as Cadian shock troops are some of the bravest and disciplined soldiers the Imperium has to offer. Cadians in particular are exceptional, and they hail from the now destroyed fortress world of Cadia. It is said the planet broke before the Guard did. And they even have their own commando units such as the Tempestus Scions, which unlike the majority of the Imperial Guard are taken from noble bloodlines, usually growing up in far better conditions than your average Imperial citizen, alongside being given some of the best training and cybernetic augmentations the Imperium can muster. Though it should be noted that a unit like this is not easily replaced and are usually reserved for precision strikes. And while a more modern, or let's say a military with any moral quandaries, might cringe at the idea of simply using all of their men and women as shameless meat shields to pummel the enemy, in 40k, that's just your duty to the Emperor, goddammit, and dying in combat to an enemy bomb is probably one of the better ways to go considering the alternatives. I think the Imperial Guard exemplifies how adaptable humanity is, as despite having a standardized loadout, many detachments are more specialized just as a result of being born on a death world like the Kriegsmen, or deep inside urban environments like a hive city. They often get made fun of, but they actually accomplish more for the Imperium despite their massive losses than most of its smaller deployments. When you take them as a whole, the Guardsmen are exceptionally mediocre at everything, and that kind of works in their benefit considering just how many factions they are up against. Orcs or Tyranids, Guardsmen tactics are usually superior. Tau, Guard are expendable and equivalent at shooting them for the most part. Eldar squads, send 50,000 Guardsmen. Necrons, send 100,000 Guardsmen, because you can. Because you have billions actively in your military and billions more to pull from the Imperium. They are simply a tidal wave of human bodies, and once the billions of undertrained Guard have died on the chopping block of war, the Imperium is free to send in millions of better trained units to mop up what's left. And if they somehow all die too, well, you can always just blow up the entire planet. It's really not all that surprising a military force that is willing to sacrifice billions in the war effort is also willing to blow up their own infrastructure if things look too dicey. They are often cited as being ill-equipped, and this is true when compared to to other Imperial forces such as the Adeptus Astartes, but the whole meme of guardsmen only being given lasguns to face against impossible odds isn't completely accurate, because while the job of maintaining the Imperium's foothold in the galaxy ain't pretty, the guardsmen are actually quite good at doing it. Next up, we have the Grand Army of the Republic. This clone army was the military force used during the final days of the Republic, highly trained and well-equipped for engagement across countless environments. They were originally created at the request of Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, who employed the renowned geneticist of Kamino to create an army for the Republic. Made up almost entirely of clone soldiers created from the genetic template of renowned bounty hunter Jango Fett. They were grown en masse on the planet Kamino for the sole purpose of war. Each clone would age twice as fast as a normal human and took around 10 years to fully train and prepare for deployment. Genetically and psychologically conditioned to be more loyal to not only their command structure but also the Republic as a whole. Treason and desertion, while not completely unheard of, was exceptionally rare even in the most dire battles. This was partially because clones were not only designed to be loyal but also be far more resistant to the psychological effects of war, rarely suffering from war-induced post-traumatic stress or nerves in the heat of combat. And if this genetic predisposition was not enough, each clone was also injected with an organic biochip that was capable of overriding whatever personal feelings they were capable of having on a given order. This was most prominently used during Order 66 to execute their longtime Jedi generals. To say a clone's training regiment was of the highest order would be an understatement. They were all given letter and number identifications throughout their training to remove any sense of identity. Even what could be considered recreation during their 10 years of training was simply more battle simulations. Clones were rapidly educated and used helmets that increased their focus to drill in perfect memorization of any battle tactics that may prove remotely useful one day in live combat. There is no enlistment from anything resembling civilian life. There is no pay. A clone is simply born to be a soldier, and that is all they know. While some of the more egregious training methods were changed or outright halted for moral reasons once the Jedi started personally overseeing their development, their training was still exceptional. It really can't be stressed enough just how efficient clone troopers could be on a galactic scale. Every single soldier was intended to be of the highest quality in both tactics and ability to follow chain of command. Where most mass-produced armies focus on quantity over quality, clones tried to focus on both, and despite being expendable, each soldier was intended to be a premium product. There are some discrepancies between Legends and current canon, where Legends had higher ranking units being directly bred for command, and this is actually the lore I prefer and think makes more sense given their genetically engineered obedience. There were similar practices with specialized units like Republic Commandos and ARC Troopers who were bred with more free thought so that they could better adapt to operations. Unlike the terrible logistics of the Imperium of Man that often failed to even know how many soldiers were in its military, clones were well organized and each had an identifying code in their left wrist to easily keep track of their military service record in the Republic's database. Both Phase 1 and Phase 2 clone trooper armor was intended to be modifiable with things such as macro binoculars for scouting and jetpacks for rough terrain. Phase 1 clone armor sported its own life support system and was completely pressurized to allow survival in the vacuum of space. Eventually, this armor was replaced by Phase 2, which, while capable of utilizing more specialized equipment attachments, it omitted the life support system and required a respirator attachment to survive in more hostile environments. Clones such as those of the commando units wore even more impressive Katarn-class armor that was some of the only armor in the Republic to have its own personal shield generators and emergency Bacta systems. Their standard issue weaponry sported the DC-15A blaster rifle and carbine with more close-range blasters and heavy weapons used as required. One of the major benefits of their military was the practical mobility of their armored units such as the ATTE that were designed to be functional across any terrain, including at times the vacuum of space. Where something like an Imperium Lehman Russ tank may struggle with maneuverability, the ATTE could climb up mountainsides at a 90-degree angle. Most of the failings of the Grand Army of the Republic were due to the terrible leadership and tactics of the Jedi Council, and less so the failings of their internally trained commanders, who often pushed against the Jedi's ideas in favor of more effective strategies. Though the drawback of your mass-produced military force being so well trained was that while individually clones are exceptional soldiers, they are also far more expensive to produce and take far longer to train than droids or even some standard enlisted soldiers, while also having their main training facility tied to a single, potentially vulnerable planet. The Grand Army of of the Republic truly shined in their capacity for coordinated assault across multiple campaigns and a uniformity thanks to being lab-grown that a regular military would really struggle to ever match. And even if we take their genetic programming out of the equation, their temperament and effectiveness in the heat of battle is really not all that surprising when you consider who they're cloned from. Next up, we have the Helldivers of Super-Earth, where the Imperium of Man is a bloated force with countless members, and the Grand Army of the Republic is a mass-produced yet highly trained clone army. The Helldivers are if you took a civilian, uploaded some democratic propaganda into their brain, and said, here's an 8-digit code to a nuclear bomb, I trust you. Helldivers may be one of the most poorly trained military units in sci-fi, receiving about 10 minutes of boot camp before they are sent off to war. With their newly earned capes, they are deployed on their super destroyers to fight in the name of liberty across the galaxy against forces both bug, bot, and even space squid. Though it should be said that while their actual Helldivers boot camp is very brief, Helldivers themselves are usually pulled from different branches of the Super Earth Armed Forces, better known as SEAF, to join the Helldivers Specialized Unit. Usually conscripted as child soldiers in some capacity for the war effort, this is why we see them able to operate such a vast array of weapons and equipment. Though to call this training quality is still a bit of a stretch, and while Helldivers are by far the most famous part of Super Earth's military, they do actually have a standing army that holds the front line, and Helldivers are intended to deploy as shock troopers to disrupt key objectives. Their standing military, however, is not remotely as well armed and supported as their Helldiver units, primarily using ballistic weapons and things such as disposable rocket launchers. Despite being horribly trained, the Helldivers are shockingly well equipped by Super Earth and granted some of the best weaponry and tech R&D can come up with. Their standard armor is varying levels of resistance to small arms, energy weapons, and even explosives. They do have access to personal energy weapons, though many of their firearms use standard explosives and projectiles, with most calibers being similar to modern-day equivalents. The saving grace of most Helldiver units are the stratagems they use to call in heavy ordnance from their super destroyers in orbit. Without the assistance of these carriers, the Helldivers would likely fail nearly all of their deployments, and oftentimes they are still caught in their own artillery bombardments. It cannot be stressed enough just how incompetent a Helldiver really is, often failing to even input the most basic codes in the field of battle. They are allegedly an elite peacekeeping force, though these guys make the worst of the Imperial Guard look exceptional in training by comparison. That being said, the Helldivers do have a truly mind-numbing amount of explosives at their disposal, and Super Earth is even capable of portable shield technology, though without the assistance of their super destroyers, they are painfully lacking in ground capabilities. And if we were to take the other factions' naval assets into account, such as the Imperium's void ships and the Republic's Venator-class star destroyers, there is really no competition as to who dominates in orbit. Helldivers also struggle with their lack of effective armored transports outside of mechanized walkers that are painfully fragile at times. Most Helldiver victories are won through sheer ordnance, which while effective is not exactly optimal. Having talked about these three factions, while I believe the Grand Army of the Republic has better individual troops and coordination than both the Helldivers and Imperium, the Imperium of Mankind simply has an absurdly large capacity for war that's hard not to rank them as the greatest expendable infantry army compared to the others. Helldivers would readily bomb any and all threats in their way, but they've simply never been put up against the factions the Imperial Guard faces regularly. And while clones are an exceptional force, and they certainly have individual soldiers that would outperform the Helldivers and Guard dramatically, the better Guard regiments are at least comparable to even Republic specialized teams while being just a small part of a much larger military force. I don't think it really comes as a shock to anyone that the Imperium just has an insane military presence in this scenario. They're a massive galactic empire, and the Astra Militarum is the force they use to at least maintain their foothold in a galaxy full of factions that are not only terrifying, but would love to see them vanish. I would love to see what others think. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you disagree. Let me know in the comments below. I thought this would be a fun comparison, as I've always been a big fan of expendable infantry, so if you like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always, thanks for watching.